When I first moved into the lakeside neighborhood, I thought I had stumbled into something close to paradise. The lake glimmered like glass at dawn, with mist hovering above the surface in ghostly ribbons, and the sunsets splashed orange and violet across the water like paint on a canvas. The pine trees whispered in the wind, and loons called in the distance. For me, this lake wasn't just scenery, it was part of my family's story. My father had fished these waters long before. The community was even dreamed of, and the small wooden dock and modest fishing boat tied to it were as much heirlooms as the furniture in my home. I often joked to myself that the boat wasn't just a vessel, it was a memory bank. Every creak of its floorboards, every scratch on its hull reminded me of mornings spent fishing with Dad, afternoons spent rowing with friends, and long quiet evenings where the only sound was water lapping against the shore. But not everyone in the community saw the lake or my boat that way. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an envelope slipped into my mailbox, bearing the official letterhead of the Homeowners Association. The HOA logo, a pine tree circled by waves, was printed at the top, and the tone of the letter was as cold and clipped as the typeface they used. It read, "Dear resident, it has come to our attention that your boat, tied to your dock, is creating disturbances on the lake. The ripples it generates disrupt the tranquility of the water and interfere with the natural aesthetic enjoyed by other homeowners. Please remove or relocate your vessel within 7 days to avoid further action." I remember standing on my porch with the letter in my hand, reading it 3 times before it sank in. Ripples. They were upset about ripples. I glanced down at the boat, which sat as innocently as ever at the dock, rocking slightly in the breeze. The water moved with the natural rhythm of wind and wildlife, nothing unusual or disruptive. It was laughable, so absurd that I chuckled to myself and set the letter aside, figuring it had to be some kind of mistake. A week later, a second letter arrived, this one sharper in tone. Final warning. Failure to remove the boat will result in fines beginning at $100 per day per HOA guidelines. My chuckle turned into a disbelieving groan. Apparently they weren't kidding. The confrontation came soon after. On a bright Saturday morning, as I was tightening the dock's planks and checking over the boat's motor, I heard the crunch of shoes on gravel. I looked up to see 3 members of the HOA board marching toward me like a miniature army, leading. The charge was the HOA president, a tall, thin man with slick-back hair and a pressed polo shirt tucked so tightly into his khakis it looked like he had been ironed into it. Flanking him were 2 others, a woman in oversized sunglasses, who clutched a clipboard like it was a weapon, and another man who seemed to be along mainly to nod solemnly at everything the president said. "Good morning," the president said, his tone polite, but carrying that unmistakable edge of authority. The kind people use when they expect you to obey before you even know what's being asked. "We need to discuss your boat." I set down my wrench and wiped my hands on a rag, bracing myself. "What about it?" The woman with the clipboard stepped forward, flipping through a stack of papers. "We've had multiple complaints," she said, tapping her pen against the page as if the words carried legal weight. "Homeowners have noted that the boat causes disruptive ripples across the lake, interfering with the enjoyment of their views and the tranquility of the environment. As per HOA guidelines, boats must not negatively impact the community's shared spaces." I raised an eyebrow, glancing from her to the president. "It's a boat on a lake. Ripples are kind of unavoidable." The third man, the nodder, finally spoke. "That may be true, but the HOA was established to protect the collective good of the community. If your personal property causes disruptions, it falls under our jurisdiction." I almost laughed again, but their faces were so serious that I realized this wasn't a prank. "You're telling me," I said slowly, "that my boat, sitting peacefully at my dock, is a problem because of ripples?" The president stiffened, adjusting his belt like he was preparing for battle. "Correct. I'm not asking you to remove it permanently. Simply relocate it to an area less visible to other residents, perhaps to a marina outside of the community. That way, everyone can enjoy the pristine, undisturbed view of the lake." I took a step closer, resting a hand on the railing of the dock, and gave them a steady look. "This boat has been here longer than any of your homes. It's not going anywhere." The clipboard woman clicked her pen with irritation, If you refuse to comply, we'll have no choice but to begin issuing fines. $100 per day until the violation is resolved. My jaw tightened, though I forced myself to stay calm. They really believed they had the authority to dictate what I could and couldn't keep on my dock. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I think you're making a mistake, I said evenly. You might want to double-check exactly what your authority covers before you start threatening me with fines. The president's smirk returned, smug and infuriating. We know our authority quite well. The lake is part of the shared environment, and as such, it falls under the HOA's jurisdiction. You may think your property ends at the shoreline, but the water is for everyone. That was when I felt the grin spread across my face. They had just revealed the depth of their ignorance. They thought they controlled the lake. They had no clue that the deed to every shimmering acre of water, every inch of shoreline, was in my name. They were trespassing on my property every time they dipped a paddle, every time they swam, every time they held one of their smug community picnics by the shore. I kept my voice calm, almost casual. Interesting perspective. I'll take it under advisement. The clipboard woman scribbled something down, clearly mistaking my calm for concession. See that you do, she said. The fines will begin next week if the boat hasn't been moved. The president gave me a curt nod, as though he had just won some great victory. We appreciate your cooperation in maintaining the beauty and tranquility of our community. I watched them march back up the path, their heads held high, certain they had cowed me into submission. But inside, I was already planning my next move. They thought they owned the lake because they managed the homes built around it. They thought their rules applied to everything they could see. But they were about to learn, in the most humiliating way possible, that the ripples they hated so much were made on water that didn't belong to them at all.